Please take your seats, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. I'm Marshall Bouton. I'm the president of the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, and on behalf of the Chicago Council and our many supporters at this event, I want to welcome you to this meeting with Ambassador Ron Kirk, the United States Trade Representative. Mr. Ambassador, we're delighted to have you here. This is a great trading city. It is the great commercial city in the United States of America. And you are sitting next to the greatest mayor in the United States of America. But truly, we really are pleased to see you at this particular moment. Not only because of Chicago's enormous connections with and interests in the global marketplace, including the Asian marketplace on which I know you intend to focus this morning, but also because our nation is in, we hope, the final throes, the final stage, the final lap of advancing our trading relationships with the world. We hope the Congress will ratify the free trade agreements with Colombia, Panama, and Korea, and I know you will be playing a very important role in that process, Mr. Ambassador. And of course, you are helping us to focus our attention on APEC. Now, many in this room will know what APEC stands for, the Asian Pacific Economic Cooperation Council. The acronym never got the second C on it. It is the first real effort to bring together the Asia-Pacific region around economic issues. Chicago has historically been a city oriented to Europe, but today we are reorienting, pun intended, to Asia. Our mayor just got off a plane about a week ago from China, where he was bringing to Chicago's interest in investment and tourism to the attention of Chinese government and business leaders. So let me now take this opportunity to ask Mayor Daley to come to the podium and offer a few remarks on behalf of himself and the city of Chicago. Mr. Mayor.
Good morning. Thank you very much, Marshall Bouton. First of all, I'd like to welcome Ron Kirk, U.S. Trade Representative. I had the privilege of working with him when he was the mayor for many, many years in Dallas, and deeply appreciate his great commitment to public service. And when President Obama nominated Ron Kirk, it was a great nomination because the mayors throughout the United States understand that global trade are so important to their economic future. And I just give you an example. The mayor of Mobile, Alabama, I think is one of the biggest free traders that I've ever met. All the way down in Alabama, how important free trade was for their economic development in the future of that city. And when you go around America, especially today, how important global trade is to the future of not only a city, but a metropolitan area like ours. So I welcome him and really thank him for his great commitment and a great challenge. And he's working very hard with Congress and throughout the country and throughout the world. And he's well respected. He comes with a commitment of public service, working on behalf of the people of the United States of America. In today's world, it's getting smaller and smaller. We all realize that. And the global economy is here. It's not going to go away. And it's a challenge of cities, especially in America and metropolitan areas, to really come together and really a force within the business community and the political community and government and really work together on behalf of promoting businesses within your own jurisdiction and within the own metropolitan area. And so recently I had the opportunity, of course, hosting President Tru's visit to our great city, and that was a great honor. He was the only city that he selected in the United States to visit, and to me that sent a strong signal on behalf of a great city. Recently, I was just in China with a delegation of business leaders, and we launched the Chicago-China Friendship Initiative. And the purpose of our visit was to raise the city's profile as a center of international commerce, increase tourism from China, establish Chicago as the most China-friendly city in the United States of America, and all through friendship. Our efforts will be supported by a permanent committee of the Chicago business and civic leaders who will analyze the Chicago business climate, make recommendations on ways to expand the reach of the campaign in China. That doesn't include just the city of Chicago, it includes basically the metropolitan area in the state of Illinois. We've already had a very strong relationship with China. The economic future of Chicago depends greatly on our success of seeking opportunities in China and around the globe. It would be difficult to overstate the importance of the relationships we're establishing there. In Chicago, we believe the importance of building partnerships. You have to have a partnership that will help our cities overcome the economic challenges and, of course, improve our global positioning. It's up to us to make maximum use of our partnerships we have created to continue moving our cities forward. In visiting all those cities, and today a young woman who represents Shenyang, which is one of our friendship cities in China, and their local government, and when you look at it, has an Office for Foreign Trade and Economic Cooperation. When you go to all those cities, it's like a city-state. They're thinking of a city-state. They don't think of the national governments. They're so large, 32, 40, 50 million people. So they're looking at a city-state relationship. In this century, all over the world, there'll be more city-states. They'll have their own, almost their own foreign policy, economic development programs. And that's what's happening if you look at the world, South America, Africa, Asia. Huge cities are rising up from ashes overnight in 10, 15, 20 years. And they're going to have foreign policy and economic opportunities for their city in the metropolitan area. And you've seen that in the history of civilization, especially in Europe, and I think you're going to see it in this century. And that will greatly improve, I believe, the importance of urban areas. And they're here to stay, and they're continuing to grow in our relationships. But I firmly believe that we have to have a clear path, path for business leaders all over America, from a local, state, and federal government policy, how they can compete in this global economy. We have to make it much easier for them. We have to make sure they have access to those markets and make sure that all of government is working on behalf of their access to these markets. And whatever we can do to shepherd that and make it much easier, I think America will be better off in the future. I want to thank Ron Kirk for his great commitment as our trade representatives. Mr. Ambassador, I really thank you for you working. I've heard from people all over the world how effective you've been working on behalf of these trade agreements, which are really important for the future of our great country. Thank you very much and welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Among Mayor Daley's many accomplishments is the transformation of this great city into a truly global city. Ambassador Kirk, you may not be aware of this, but every other year the Chicago Council and A.T. Kearney collaborate on an independent, empirically based objectives study of 65 cities globally and how they rank in terms of their global engagement. And in the latest edition of that index published last fall, Chicago ranked 6th in the world, up two places from 2 years before, despite the financial crisis and recession. That demonstrates the robustness and vibrancy of this city under Mayor Daley. I want to take a moment to thank the lead corporate sponsors for this morning's event, Illinois Toolworks and Underwriters Laboratories. Their generous support makes many of these events possible. Also our supporting sponsor, the Boeing Company. And cooperating partners for today's breakfast include the APEC 2011 U.S. Host Committee, the United States Department of Commerce's U.S. Commercial Service, the World Trade Center Wisconsin, the Japan External Trade Organization, the International Trade Association of Greater Chicago, and the Chicago International Trade Commissioners Association. I would like now to introduce Ambassador Michael Michalak, Senior Advisor to the APEC 2011 U.S. Host Committee, and until very recently, the United States Ambassador to Vietnam, where he hosted a Chicago Council delegation very generously in Hanoi last March. Mike, please come to the podium.
Well, thank you very much, Marshall. I see that we have a surfeit of ambassadors here this morning, and it's my great pleasure to be here in the great city of Chicago, as we just heard, with the #1 trade mayor and the #1 trade city in the United States. So I'm very happy to be here today to talk to you a little bit about APEC, the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, well, it is. It's 4 adjectives in search of a noun, as many people say. But it's the Cooperation Forum, it's the Cooperation Council, it's the Cooperation Organization, it's whatever you want it to be. And I think that that is kind of a keynote for the kind of things that APEC can do. It's got 21 of the largest economies in the world as members. It comprises almost half of the world's population. It accounts for 60% of American exports, and it accounts for 60% of the world's GDP. It contains the fastest growing economies in the world and some of the most energetic economies in the world. I just spent 3.5 years in Vietnam, which is itself one of the tigers of Southeast Asia, a place that I would urge you all, when you have a chance, to come and visit, because you will find great opportunities there, great opportunities for exports, great opportunities for investments, and great opportunities for tourism. It's a wonderful place to be. But today we're going to show you a short video on APEC. We're going to talk a little bit about the fact that this is the United States year to host APEC. And with 21 economies, that opportunity comes around not too often. We started the idea of having a leaders meeting associated with APEC in 1993, when President Clinton, about a month or so before the major APEC meeting, decided that he wanted to invite all of his colleagues from the APEC economies to come to Seattle, to Blake Island, Seattle, to talk about the economic issues of the day. The thing that is important for this audience, though, is to know that APEC is probably the first economic organization, and the United States considers APEC to be the premier economic organization in the Asia-Pacific region. It is the first organization that actually set up its own business advisory council called the APEC. Now, if you're going to learn about APEC, you're going to have to learn about acronyms, and believe me, APEC has got tons of acronyms. The APEC is the APEC Business Advisory Council. Contains 3 members, usually chosen by the leaders of those countries, to represent business ideas and get business issues put on the APEC agenda. And I think we've been very successful in doing that. We did the Information Technology Agreement, which provided for duty-free entry of IT products within the APEC region. We then took that idea into the WTO and made it a trade regulation. We're now working on what we call regional integration. Regional integration is the idea of the free trade area of the Asia-Pacific, and the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which Ambassador Kirk and his team are working very hard on even as we speak, is one way that we can achieve this kind of a barrier-free trade environment for the 21st century. We're working on trying to make a 21st century commercial environment for the 21st century, one which will allow people to transfer goods and services and people seamlessly throughout the region. So APEC is doing an awful lot, and this year is the chance for the United States to showcase how our leadership and our efforts can help to improve the economic environment, create jobs throughout the region for the benefit of all people involved. So You're going to see the video, but what I wanted to do today was to tell you what the opportunities are for business to get involved in APEC. APEC is a year-long series of meetings. We had our first meeting in February in Washington, D.C. The second meeting, to which Ambassador Kirk will go, is the meeting of the ministers responsible for trade, which will be held in Montana. And the third meeting will be held in San Francisco, with opportunities to talk about energy, with opportunities to talk about green growth, opportunities to talk about health. And then the final meeting, the summit meeting, will be held in Hawaii in November. Associated with each one of these meetings are a series of private sector events, places where private sector representatives like yourselves will be able to meet with government representatives and form some of the public-private partnerships that Mayor Daley was talking about earlier in his remarks. I think that these days, when you've got sovereign wealth funds, you've got companies joining together under the banner of their government to push, whether it's nuclear power or airplanes or what have you, it's important for us in the United States to search for our own model of public-private partnerships, and I think that working together in APEC, we can come up with some of these models that are going to serve us well going into the future. The premier event for the private sector during the APEC year is the CEO Summit, which happens in November around the leaders meeting, and we hope it's going to provide an opportunity for CEOs to actually meet with some of the 21 leaders who will be present there in Waikiki and talk about some of the issues of the day. So there are many opportunities for private sector involvement. I would urge you to go to the APEC 2011 website and take a look at it and see all of the things that you can participate in should you wish. We invite all comers to come and participate and help us make 2011 the best year possible for APEC, the best year possible for the United States of America. So thank you very much.
Involved, and for our country, hosting APEC 2011 is a pivotal event in the U.S. engagements in this important region.
Well, APEC is really the premier organization for discussing economic policy in the Asia-Pacific region. And so by engaging through APEC, we really have a chance to push forward policy change.
It's a population that is going to increase in their economic means over the next several years and decades, and as such, it becomes a huge growth opportunity, and that can greatly benefit American business, and I think the American economy in general.
The way to get more jobs is to open markets around the world, to expand trade, to expand opportunities, to expand global investment.
When the world seems to grow smaller and smaller, and protectionism has a lot of subtle ways of raising its face, engagement is the way we fight that.
It's critical that the U.S. be seen to be actively engaged in APEC. Our hosting of the APEC meetings in 2011 sends a strong signal about our commitment to the region.
The United States and other APEC economies will succeed in increasing exports and jobs. And that's why I'm so proud the United States is hosting APEC in 2011. That's why I've worked so hard to bring the APEC Trade Ministers meeting to Big Sky, Montana.
President Obama will be the host in Honolulu. Having attended APEC CEO summits for many years, I've seen firsthand that these meetings create a unique opportunity to engage business and governments about the real challenges that we can collectively address.
With the progress we're making on the Trans-Pacific Partnership, I would love to come out of the APEC meetings and have the TPP much further along the road to effectively becoming the APEC free trade agreement of the APEC economies.
Not only the United States need it and the companies need it, but frankly the trading system needs it. It needs to see that those countries that are the most dynamic economically in the world today are continuing to push the envelope in terms of what we can do in terms of free trade. And that's what APEC can do.
All of us have a common goal of creating higher quality of life, more jobs, better standards of living for our constituencies, and that's what trade's about.
Thank you, Mike, for those comments about APEC. We'll take a brief break now so you can have a little breakfast if you haven't already. And after that, Michael Saltzman, Chief Financial Officer of Underwriters Laboratories, will introduce Ambassador Kirk, and then we will hear from the ambassador. And then Michael will moderate some discussion with all of you. I do want to ask you or draw your attention to the Chicago Council membership brochure that's at your places. We hope that those of you who are not members of the council will soon become so. We host 150 events a year, covering a wide range of subjects, of course, including the very important subjects of trade and economics and business. And while we're grateful for your attendance, your gate fees don't cover all our costs. I'm sure you've heard that refrain before. So we look forward. You can also find out more about the council at our website, thechicagocouncil.org. Please enjoy your breakfast, and we'll be back to you very soon.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you've enjoyed your breakfast, and we'll now start the formal program. As Marshall mentioned, I'm Michael Saltzman. I'm the Chief Financial Officer of Underwriters Laboratories. This morning, I'm delighted to have the opportunity to introduce Ambassador Ron Kirk, the United States Trade Representative. To echo Marshall, Mr. Ambassador, we're delighted that you could join us in Chicago, and we look forward to your remarks outlining U.S. strategy for continued economic engagement in the Asia-Pacific region. Underwriters Laboratories appreciates the stepped-up initiatives that the Ambassador Kirk and the USTR team have undertaken to address technical regulations which affect nearly 80% of trade in products. Over the years, we've worked closely with the USTR and manufacturers to resolve related issues and to ensure that U.S. exports by large multinationals and small and medium-sized enterprises alike continue to be welcome in markets around the world. We especially appreciate the USTR's efforts in recent years to enhance its attention to standards and conformity issues. APEC in particular is a fertile ground for constructive engagement on these issues. And UL is delighted to see regulatory convergence and collaboration as one of the U.S. government's 3 priorities for the APEC 2001 U.S. Host Year. Such collaboration in emerging areas like electric vehicles, smart-enabled products, and renewable energy will go a long way toward promoting common standards and conformity frameworks that meet regulatory confidence needs and facilitate the free flow of goods. Now I'd like to take a minute to mention some of Ambassador Kirk's admirable accomplishments. Ambassador Ron Kirk, the United States Trade Representative, is a member of President Obama's cabinet and serves as the President's principal trade advisor, negotiator, and spokesperson on trade issues. Since Ambassador Kirk was confirmed by the U.S. Senate in March 2009, he has led USTR in developing policies that are proactive, responsible, and that recognize that trade can be a job-creating pillar of economic recovery here and abroad. Ambassador Kirk has directed USTR's market-opening agenda through negotiations and dialogue with trading partners around the world. These initiatives include working to conclude and advance bilateral free trade agreements with Korea, Colombia, and Panama, advancing the ambitious regional Trans-Pacific Partnership talks, and sustaining serious U.S. engagement in the Doha round of multilateral negotiations at the World Trade Organization. Ambassador Kirk brings both public service and private sector experience to his position. As we've heard, he served 2 terms as the first African-American mayor of Dallas. Prior to being mayor, he served as the Texas Secretary of State under Governor Ann Richards. Ambassador Kirk, we're delighted to welcome you to Chicago, and I believe I speak on behalf of everyone when I say we look forward to your remarks. Following the ambassador's remarks, we'll open the floor to questions from the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, if you could please join me in welcoming me to the stage, Ambassador Ron Kirk.
Michael, thank you for the kind introduction. Marshall and others, thank you so much to the council for hosting us, and to my good friend, Mayor Daley, thank you so much, not just for being here today, but thanks for whatever it's been, 20 years? How long are your terms? He's been mayor forever, mayor for life, you know what I mean? What a great role model. I've been privileged. You know, usually, you know, when I go and do these forums and I have to sit there and listen, we're the greatest city in the world, we have the greatest mayor, I try to come up with some sort of snappy retort. But considering that I think Rich Daley's about as good as it gets in our business, all I can do is applaud you and thank you for your incredible stewardship of one of the great cities, one of the great economic regions in the world. And whatever you do from here out, God bless you. You certainly have earned your rest. What a good friend. Ambassador Michalak, thank you for being here. Thanks for, I'm dragging this out a little bit because I'm trying to figure out how to abbreviate my remarks, since between the mayor and the ambassador, they kind of told you the importance of what we do, why we do it, and then the ambassador basically gave you my whole APEC spiel. So somewhere in here, you're going to feel like I've heard this before. I had to pull my stamps out. I said, it's bad enough you bring me to Chicago the same day the president's going to show up. Now you have Mayor Daley. Now you have the ambassador give my talk. And so I guess I'm just that other guy that's in the room. But I'm thrilled to be back here. I have great memories. We have so many friends that I've had a chance to say hello. Ironically, for me, it was here in Chicago. The president announced me during the transition as his choice to be the United States Trade Representative. And so we were here just a little bit over 3 years ago, and I've come back almost annually with Senator Durbin and the mayor and others to talk to the council, because Chicago is important for this country, not just for Illinois, but for this country's economic region. And this is a city that gets it. This is a city that very much understands. You have one of the most diversified economies. I mean, you're involved in agriculture in this state, you're involved in machinery, you're involved in high tech, you've got great colleges and universities, you've got the infrastructure, you have all the tools that a community, a region, and the mayor says this, and he led a number of us mayors to the understanding of how important we are as metropolitan economic regions. But this is how America's going to grow and prosper. And before I get into APEC, the one simple question that people ask why we do this is that this is what the president means when he says we have to be smarter about how we're going to win in the future. Because notwithstanding all of the positive vibes I'm getting from a group like you that understands trade, the reality, we have more Americans that are anxious about their future than ever before. And for many of them, it is counterintuitive now to go to the American public and say that one way we're going to grow our economy, have economic prosperity, is more trade. When an overwhelming majority of Americans right now, if you reflexively ask them, has trade been good for America? Almost 70% of Americans say no. And they feel like that the trade-off, they love the fact we can feed our families cheaper. They love the fact that you don't have to rush out and buy the newest iPad because you can wait 3 months and there'll be a competitive product, maybe with more features. They love that. But too many Americans believe we've traded off, frankly, electronics and T-shirts and having our jobs go somewhere else. And so the importance of organizations like yours, communities like Chicago, and leaders like your mayor is helping Americans, helping people in Illinois and Chicago understand that, in fact, a big part of our economic prosperity going forward is that America now has the ability to help these incredibly emerging economies that are looking to replicate what we've done in this economy by embracing democracy, open markets, freedom, competition, as they begin to move people out of poverty, whether it's in China, India, Africa, Latin America. This is an opportunity for us to help them grow. And we can sell more of what we make, create, invent, grow, raise here in America to the rest of the world. And that's going to be part of our economic future. And if you take nothing else from this talk, this is why APEC is so important. Let me tell you a little bit about how this manifests itself here in Illinois. And again, I may be preaching to the choir, but it never hurts to arm you at least with some of the facts. The state of Illinois
exported almost $50 billion in goods last year. And when we say goods, we do that intentionally because it's hard for us to capture our trade and services. So all these numbers that I'm giving you, we think are somewhat conservative because it's harder to capture trade, whether it's architecture or insurance and others, and those numbers. In the Chicago area, you're responsible for almost 30% of that. 28 billion of the Chicago metropolitan area goes into that $49 billion. That means 348,000 private sector jobs in the state of Illinois are tied to our ability to find markets, open markets, and sell products around the world. Going forward, I think the president has made a wise case that the more that we can sell around the world, the better we do at home. And one simple reality, as counterintuitive as it is for some Americans, most Americans believe that we have the most open markets in the world. And I tell people, just go to any college campus, walk around the parking lot, you understand how much we embrace other products. Our tariffs are some of the lowest, and we have helped build economies around the world because we have the largest consumer base in the world, because we built an economy in which we built a great middle class, and we have the ability to buy and consume at an extraordinary rate beyond any other economy in the world. But going forward, as these developing economies begin to emulate that and grow a middle class, we now have an opportunity to reap the benefits of that because our tariffs, frankly, aren't going to go much lower. And a big part of what we're doing now, whether it's through APEC or this Trans-Pacific Partnership, is working with these emerging economies to frankly lower their rates of entry for our products into that markets. And what it means at the bottom line is that we get to sell more of our stuff. If I can use sophisticated mayor speak, as I used to say when I was in Dallas, I talked to school groups all the time, Richard, and they'd always ask me, what does NAFTA really mean? And I told them, you cut through all the trade stuff, it really just comes down to, will you buy my stuff? That's all at the end of the day. Well, through APEC, we're going to have an opportunity to sell a lot of stuff. The ambassador talked to you about that. The reason we are so excited about this opportunity to host the APEC economies is that it doesn't come around that often, but we're also at a discrete period of time where this region is going to be responsible for over half of the world's economic growth over the next several years. And the APEC right now works as a coalition of consensus economies, 21 economies around the Asia Pacific. And for the most part, we meet through our leaders, trade ministers, finance ministers, come up with best practices. We implement them. But for years, we have always had the dream of a formalized trade agreement among the APEC economies. We weren't able to get there. But a year ago, when we were in Singapore, President Obama, 2 years ago in Singapore, President Obama made the decision and announced that the United States would formally link up with 8 other economies and begin work on crafting what we hope will ultimately become the free trade agreement of the APEC region. It's called the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And our reasons for doing this are pretty simple. One, as the ambassador says, this is an incredibly dynamic region. Incredible growth trends. 40% of the world's population, 54% of the world's GDP, but we account for over 44% of the world's trade. And we're there because this is where it's going to go. I know Chicago and Dallas compete in a lot. We have a lot of things in common. We love sports. Congratulations to the Bulls. They shouldn't have played those starters last night. If Noah ends up hurting the playoffs, you're going to do it. But in Dallas, we would just love one basketball championship. But we did win a Stanley Cup, and you all won the Stanley Cup last year. And when people ask me, why are you going to this region? I love using a story I heard about Wayne Gretzky. And he was being interviewed, in his post-career life. And, he was the greatest hockey player ever. No disrespect to Bobby Hull. But somebody asked him, how are you so adept at scoring goals? Why are you so good? And he says, well, you watch a lot of hockey games. It's like watching your kids' soccer games. Everybody runs where the ball is. And he said, but the key to really being good is you got to go where you think the puck's going to be. Well, business is no different. And you all are businessmen and women. By our focusing on Asia Pacific, we're going to where we know the next generation of opportunities are going to be in trying to get ahead of the curve, and by us being on the ground floor of crafting what we hope will be the highest standard, most aspirational trade agreement of this next century, we help set the table that everyone else will then link up to. And again, as business leaders, I think you all understand the advantage, the competitive advantage of being first to market. So we have the opportunity to welcome our other members of the APEC economy as we work on issues like regional integration, working on a more seamless economy. Since we do a lot of open things now, the dialogue we have with you helps us to really drill down and do practical things now. One of our challenges is as we look at our customers, the way I like to look at my work, and I think who exports? I'm still struck by the fact 97% of exporters in the United States are what we define as small business. Now, if you're Boeing, GE, Caterpillar, some of the larger companies, you have extraordinary resources to figure out 70, 80 trade agreements, different regulatory regimes. If you're a supplier to one of those companies, and your introduction to global trade is because you've been doing work maybe for Dell or for one of them, the thought of having to wade your way through 5 different regulatory regimes can just be an absolute bar. So a big part of what we're going to be working on, as the ambassador said, when the trade ministers come together, is what can we do to promote regulatory cooperation and coherence. And we start with the basis. It's going to be hard to get very different economies and go back and undo regulatory structures that are rooted in different legal systems and customs, but at least going forward, can we have certain principles that agree, let's make it easier. And to put it in layman's language, our goal is just make it cheaper, easier, faster for us to be able to move goods throughout this region. Whether you're Boeing and been doing this for years, or whether you're a smaller company that's just becoming intrigued about how you can expand your business base by going global, we want to make it as easy for you to be able to do that. So we're going to focus on 3 principal topics, both when we are in Montana and when our leaders meet. And one is strengthening our regional economic integration and expanding trade, promoting green growth, and advancing regulatory cooperation and convergence. We've already gotten work on this. I'll give you a couple of examples of some successes we've had. Many of you will be pleased to know in our efforts on streamlining cost and moving goods, we have come up with what we call a supply chain connectivity action plan. And under that plan, there are a number of initiatives that we are working on with other APEC economies that are going to help it make it easier for businesses that are already exporting in the region or want to. One of the areas that we look to address with our partners is how we can expedite the shipment of goods under a certain value, establishing sort of a de minimis commercially useful baseline. So that if you're not shipping a whole lot, you might be able to do that at a lower cost and with a little less regulatory red tape. Again, this can be extraordinarily helpful for us, for small businesses. And part of our focus on small businesses is the reality. Even as our country clearly is going through an economic recovery, and we've now had 18 plus months of solid economic growth. We've now had 6 solid months of adding jobs. We added 230,000 jobs last month. And for those that, the president will make his own case later, but I would just do, from an economic standpoint, from all those people that said that the health care plan would be a job killer, we have added 1.8 million jobs since the health care bill went into effect. That is 1.8 million more jobs than were created in the 10 years before. So we're not where we want to be, but the path that the president has put us on, of fiscal restraint, being smart about how we invest in the future, is working. And we're growing jobs, and we're creating jobs. But I know from being a mayor, and Mayor Daley knows, as proud as we are, and it's interesting, one of the last battles I lost as mayor was over the Boeing relocation to Chicago. But the reality is, most people in Chicago work for a business that employs less than 500 people. And as proud as we are of winning those big corporate relocations, still, most net new job growth in this country comes from investing in small business. So we think whatever we do to demystify, simplify this world of global commerce for small businesses will have extraordinary benefit to us as we tackle the still largest imperative we have, and that's how we put America back to work. And so that is why we're focusing so much on the cheaper, easier, faster part of what we're doing. Third, we're also focusing on the intersection of trade and innovation because we're trying to build to our strength here in the United States. So whether that's making it easier to trade in the new green technologies, if we know this is where the United States can compete and win, we want to have an early harvest with some of our partners to agree that we're going to reduce or try to eliminate tariffs on certain green technologies that we can agree on. So we make it easier to get those in the hands of consumers all around the world. I mentioned that I will be hosting the trade ministers, which is an annual part of our work within APEC in Big Sky, Montana. One thing we're doing for the first time, we've invited all of our colleagues who are responsible for small business development for the first time. So for the first time ever, we're going to have a joint meeting with both the trade ministers and those ministers in the other 21 economies that are responsible for promoting small business, hoping we can come up with some clear paths and goals that we want to achieve. We will continue this work throughout the balance of the year leading up to the APEC leaders meeting that President Obama will host in Hawaii later in the year. There are multiple opportunities for you to get involved and learn more. I would invite you, if you aren't a member, to become a part of the Chicago Council. Look up any of the websites that we had available to you in the video, and if you are interested in learning more about our work, I would invite you to contact us. If you don't want to remember all of that, just go on ustr.gov. It's like United States Trade Rep, just ustr.gov, and you can learn more about our work, and we would certainly welcome your participation. But it is great fun to be back in Chicago. It is a wonderful city. It is a great economic model for what we can do to sustain growth, to create jobs for our hard-working families, but also continue to lead in the global integration of all of our economies. And again, I applaud the mayor and business council for his strong leadership, and we look forward to seeing some of you in Big Sky and hopefully even more of you in Honolulu. So let me stop with that, and if we have questions, I think Michael will join me and I'll be happy to entertain those. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Mr. Ambassador. Okay, at this point, we'll open the floor to questions from the audience. If you have a question, I'd ask that you raise your hand so I can identify you. Then wait for the microphone to get you, and if you could, please provide a brief introduction of yourself to the ambassador. So, any questions? Yes. Let's wait. Let's get the mic, if we could.
I'm Mary Roberts, and I head up the International Division for Department of Commerce here in Illinois. And it's a pleasure to see you again, Ambassador Kirk. Last year when you were here with Dick Durbin, we actually had a wonderful roundtable with some of our small businesses, and you spoke at that time about some of these same issues of easing trade, and I love that you're going to make things faster, easier, and cheaper. Because as we help our companies to export around the world, we are asked for those faster, easier, cheaper ways to do trade. But I also just returned from Turkey, and while this is focusing on Asia, we have issues, whether it be in Turkey or in Asia, particular with visas. And we have had a number of delegations from China who have not been able to attend even some of our largest conferences, the Bio Conference, because they can't get their visas fast enough to be able to come here. It's an issue. Minister Shazlian in Turkey mentioned that visas are an issue even for the Turkish people. If you could speak a little bit about the visa issue and what we're doing to try and ease that process. Thank you.
Well, it is a real challenge for us, and as the President has said, the United States has become one of the most admired
economies and democracies around the world because we've always opened ourselves to the best talent from around the world. And our challenge is Congress is wonderfully zealous of its responsibility to set the nation's policy for immigration, and the visa issue gets caught up in that. But I would tell you from Secretary of State Clinton and myself and others, we hear this challenge and we think it is really unproductive for us at a time that part of our strength going forward is going to be our ability to sell more goods around the world, particularly given the reality that 80% of Americans now work in a service economy. And it's hard to sell a service if your customers can't hear and see your product. I mean, it's not helping us. We have made that argument to Congress, hopefully, as we move forward at some point with an overhaul of the immigration law, we can have a relaxation or an expansion of some of our visa standards. I want to be careful. I don't mean relaxation of any of our responsibilities in terms of security, but it very much, we think, is in our own interest to make sure that, particularly when we're inviting business here, they can come. And even we tend not to think of tourism as an element of trade, but that's a huge part of our economy. Particularly, you know, when you get in Florida and Texas, and I'm sure even here in Chicago. But it's an issue that we're all aware of and hoping to work with Congress to find an acceptable resolution.
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Ambassador, Ann Weeks with Underwriters Laboratories. Appreciate you being here today. We, like many, are excited about the prospects of the TPP and its seeding a broader free trade agreement of Asia Pacific. Could you talk a little bit about the prospects for concluding that and whether you're hopeful for a November?
Sure. The Trans-Pacific Partnership we began a year ago with 8 other economies that at least started with one sort of common framework that we wanted to build the next generation trade model. Most of what we've been working on in Washington, even with respect to the 3 free trade agreements we inherited, Korea, Panama, and Colombia, were built on, you know, a 1990 model. It was a good model, but the world's changed a lot, and we've learned a lot, particularly from businesses with, you know, as excited as we are about this, but you still have a lot of state-owned economies that are transitioning to market economies, and that's very different challenges that we faced maybe 10 or 15 years ago. This whole issue of regulatory convergence and promoting green growth is something that wasn't built into our models. But we all came and agreed we would do a couple of things. One, we'd put everything on the table. And a trade negotiation is no different than any of your other business negotiations. Everybody starts here and then everybody starts haggling. But we agreed we would try to be as aspirational, as forward-leaning as we could. And we at least had as our stretch goal, seeing if we couldn't get the agreement, if not complete, but have it substantially complete by the time our leaders meet in November. We have had 6 or 7 rounds of negotiations. The last one was just recently in Singapore. They have gone very well thus far, but I liken it to spring training for an athletic team. You know, when everybody shows up and you're just scrimmaging against one another, and then you all put on your uniforms and you look good, everybody's pretty much convinced we're going to win. Well, now we're to the hard part of really getting in and saying what's on the table and what's not. And we have advanced economies like the United States and Australia, and you have these emerging economies like Vietnam and Malaysia. And so our differences are beginning to become crystallized, but they are still, we're still on this path. We still have that goal. We have some very tough decisions to make. But everyone's working in a very cooperative spirit. I'm a word a little bit just about we've lost some time because of the extraordinary natural disasters throughout Southeast Asia. And I know we've most had on our minds what's happened in Japan, but you've got to remember it wasn't that long before that we had the horrible earthquake in Christchurch, and before that we had flooding in Australia. That's not an excuse, but we've had to tact a little bit just to
to recognize that some of our colleagues have had other things on their minds than negotiating trade. But we're still moving along. We have a next round schedule. We're taking a little more time for this one because we are now getting to the harder substantive details. For us, in the United States, I don't just get to show up at these things and start negotiating. We work hand in glove with Congress and our industry as we think about what we're going to table, whether it's in manufacturing or services or how we're going to handle intellectual property. We tend to believe that every other society in the world values the protection of intellectual property the way we do. There are large parts of the world, either because their economies are built on the creative adaptation of our intellectual property. I won't say a thing. I tell my daughters, imitation isn't always the sincerest form of flattery, especially if they're not paying you for it. But you've got to recognize you have some economies that just think, well, that's the way they grow. We let the United States build it, and they'll look at you with good faith and say, we don't have the colleges and universities and research you're doing, we're poor. And, you know, Boeing's huge, Caterpillar's big, it ain't gonna. Well, we've got to get them to understand you're never going to develop that capacity. Don't see this as what you're doing for the U.S. Think of what you're making an investment to develop that own capacity. But we're working through those issues. The issues of pharmaceuticals, huge stumbling block. There are lots of parts of the world that see our protection of copyrights and patents for pharmaceuticals as nothing but a way to make it, you know, impossible for them to afford life-saving medicine. So bridging those sort of issues and differences can be clear. But we're on a good path. We're continuing to move. We probably have put out more information on what we're doing with this Trans-Pacific Partnership than any other agreement we've ever done. So maybe in the interest of time, I would invite you to view our website on that, and we can get you as up to speed as we can. But we're still committed to that goal. We've got a lot of work to do. We've got elections in 5 of the 9 member countries. So we're hoping that won't slow us down. But at least right now, we're all committed to this process, which is a good thing.
Yes.
Good morning, Ambassador. Anne-Marie St. Germain with Resolute Consulting. Could you please comment on your insights, perspective on the free trade agreement with Republic of Korea and the potential impact of that opportunity?
Well, thank you. The Korea Free Trade Agreement is one of 3 agreements that had begun under the previous administration that we inherited. And frankly, I walked into a Congress that was bitterly divided about the value of them. You had half the Congress that thought I was a two-headed monster for even thinking about moving forward, with this thing negotiated by George Bush, and the other half thought, why don't the Democrats just get over it and let's do it? And the one reason that I took this job, and you all appreciate it more than anything, having particularly watched this president's continued calmness and steadiness through every storm, is just his refusal to accept these sort of false choices that dominate our political debate. You either got to be for trade and you don't care anything about human rights or worker rights, you raise any concern at all, oh my God, you're not. And the president said, you know what, we do need to do this, but we have to do it better. And we endured a withering amount of criticism because people thought we were dragging our feet. But the bottom line, the president said some of the objections raised about Korea, particularly the extraordinary imbalance of our ability to access their market in the automotive sector, and here was just not one we could sell to the American public. I mean, Korea, we buy 700,000 Korean-made cars every year. That's not bad, especially since half of them are made in America. But when we're selling less than 7,000 in Korea, it's pretty hard to go to the American public and say, that's a good deal. But the bottom line, the president challenged me last year to work with the Koreans to see if we couldn't come up with a better balanced package. We did that. We concluded it in December. And not only did we get a better deal, we did something almost unheard of in today's environment in Washington. We produced an agreement that not only the chamber and the agricultural groups were excited about, but Ford and the United Auto Workers embraced. And you all know unions better than I do. It is rare that you have any union come out in favor of a trade agreement. But it's a good deal. It's pending in Congress. We're ready to move it forward. It's going to be huge
for an area like Chicago, in which you sell lots of machinery. We already sell about $38 billion a year to Korea. 80% of that is in manufactured goods. Again, the tariffs on those are going to come down. So if we did nothing else, it's going to put an 8, 10, 15% premium on what you're selling now. Chicago also moves a lot of agricultural products. And if I can digress for 1 minute, no industry is more dependent on exports than agriculture. And I hope you never take for granted the one thing America can do, we can feed ourselves. You know, part of the mess we're in the Middle East and others is we are so dependent on other regions for energy and oil, but we are spectacularly one of the most productive agriculture communities in the world. Our farmers and ranchers, processors are going to win in a big way in Korea. And then again, the service industry is where we're excited. Korea has about a $500 billion service economy, and for the first time, it's going to be opened up. So, and services is so broad, that encompasses everything from engineering and architecture, but FedEx and delivery services. So this is a big win. We think it's about $10 to $11 billion in increased exports, and another, whatever that is, 7,000 or 8,000 jobs potential for the U.S. So we're hopeful we can work with Congress and get that moved. And while I'm on it, you didn't ask, last week, we reached a resolution with Colombia on an action plan to address the concerns many members of Congress and human rights groups had about the extraordinary level of violence in the past against union leaders. But we came up with a labor action plan that President Obama and President Santos have endorsed that puts us in a position we are very likely to see congressional action on that, and we think we are near, if not just very close to the end of our work with Panama that will allow us to have a vote in Congress on all three of these agreements in the very near future.
All the way in back of the room. Please wait for a mic.
Oh, that's fine.
Oh, okay. One right in the middle.
Again.
Thank you. Sorry for the confusion there. Good morning, Mr. Ambassador. My name is Rick Furfer. I'm a local attorney. I specialize in banking law. I know the focus this morning of your talk is Trans-Pacific and Asian, and that's where you think the puck is going. But the puck may actually go somewhere else. So I wonder if you could also address some of the hot button issues that maybe keep you up at night, wondering how to put out fires around the rest of the world, because your jurisdiction is worldwide.
Well, the two things. The one thing that drove my work and my decision to accept this job, and I mentioned, since at least I was announced here, and I was privileged to meet the president when I ran for the United States Senate. I didn't come out of the Chicago or Harvard mafia. My daughters like to joke that I'm part of his diversity plan to prove everybody didn't have to come from Harvard. But most of my friends in Texas, when they announced me as the trade rep, I thought my phone would ring off. Everybody says, you're going to be in the cabinet. And literally most of my friends said, Kirk, I thought you were the president's guy. I thought he liked you. I said, yeah. And I said, yeah, but you got trade. People hate trade. and what I was willing to address and what I love about the president, we realized Americans don't hate trade. Americans are smart. Now, trade is 13% of our GDP. It contributes way more. So we don't wake up every day thinking about trade. But the American public's pretty intuitive. What they were is they're just extraordinarily frustrated about trade. And so more than anything, I thought I would be doing a disservice to the president and the American public if I came in and did what some people wanted and just said, you got to go get Panama and Korea and Colombia passed. Our goal is not just to pass free trade agreements. Our goal is to more honestly try to create a policy that the American public can look at and understand the wisdom of what we're doing, how trade can support job growth here, and they believe that America can win from trade. Because then if you can do that, then we have the ability to do all those sort of things that the mayor was talking about. And what bothers me more than anything is still whether, as excited as we are in this room, the president reminds me, we're trying to pass 3 trade agreements against the backdrop of an unemployment rate that most Americans still think is at least 8 points too high, in which many people are concerned about the growth of our government. And an overwhelming majority of Americans, when you mention the trade word, just put their hands up and say no. And they think trade's responsible for our jobs being offshored. And more than anything, it's just what we can do to draw a more direct line between what we're doing with our office, with your council, and helping people understand this is why you have a job here now. And I made a very deliberate decision a year ago after spending the first year traveling around the world and engaging my partners, which I have to do. But I made the decision last year that I would get off the road. And so I spent the last year traveling around the United States. And I've now been to over 20 states, over 50 cities, engaging people, and not just in Chicago where trade is easily embraced, but I've been to Pittsburgh, and I've been to Detroit, and I've been to Maine. I spent 2 hours with the United Steelworkers last Friday, and I survived. And it was a good meeting because they appreciated what we've done to enforce our agreements. The number one complaint that we get is we know everybody's excited about signing a new deal, but your frustration, and I hear this even from exporters, is everybody's taking advantage of us. When is somebody going to stand up and fight for our rights? And I didn't go into it as much, but the work that we've done in enforcement, using all the tools we have. President Obama was the first president ever to use a tool we had to tell China, you can't just dump products in the United States and put our businesses out. And we had a case that had been presented to us. It was the 8th one in which the ITC, a separate agency, had found a harmful surge. The president has to make the call whether we act on that. Barack Obama was the first president ever to stand up to China and say enough. And again, we were ripped apart, on all the press. They thought we'd spark a trade war. China didn't like it. But at least, being the father of 2 daughters prepared me for one thing, that I knew I most got my daughter's attention when I finally disciplined them something and they didn't like it. When you're saying no and everybody's negotiating about what their punishment's going to be, you're losing the battle. And, being a parent can help you be a good trade negotiator. No has to be no. But anyway, the work we've done in enforcement, what I worry more about anything is not audiences like you, and I challenge you. Go talk to your friends. And you don't just ask them, do you think free trade's good for, and God forbid, don't do what I did and use the free trade word. You say free trade and we have lost a battle. So more than anything, if we can get Americans comfortable that this makes sense, it can help us grow our economy, we can do so much. The good part of my job, and I can tell you, and it is so humbling and rewarding getting to travel around the world and be the face of the United States, but Made in America is unquestionably still the most treasured brand in the world. Especially if it's machinery or something, because one, people, if they buy it here, they believe it's actually going to do what you said it's going to do. And they know that you'll stand behind it. No family in the world worries about putting food on the table and into their children's mouths if it's been raised here. So that's a huge premium. We have a huge opportunity, but we just have to get the dynamics right here, and then we have to make sure that our partners are willing to open up their markets the way we have. You all have been incredibly polite. And again, I thank you for being here. I invite you to take up our host offer, become involved with the Global Council. I hope some of you will go on our website, learn more, and engage us in how we can have a much more dynamic trade policy. And we hope to see some of you in Big Sky and some of you with us in Hawaii later this year. But thank you again for being with us.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you for sharing your thoughts with us on trade and our expanding relationship in the Asia region. We thank you for coming to Chicago, and we invite you back in the future to come see us. At this point, ladies and gentlemen, the program is adjourned. Thank you.